We're here tonight to talk about the legacies of war. And Oliver, in your book, you talk about the problem of ideology and as a kind of motivating force. And hopefully, I'm not going to sound like Sigmund Freud here, but I wanted to start with your dad. Louis Stone served as a lieutenant colonel in World War II. He was part of Eisenhower's staff in Paris. And you write how in 1945, after the war, he was already joining, as you say, the old struggle against communism. How did your dad's experiences and his ideological anti-communism stance affect you growing up?
Oh, very much so. It was an interesting journey he had because he came out of the Depression with his brothers and his sister. And of course, their ideas went to the left because there was so much poverty in the United States. And he liked Roosevelt at first. That's what's interesting. But then he became a Wall Street broker, so he saw it from the other side, from 1935 on. And he liked the Russia because Russia, we'd had no dispute with Russia. He didn't really understand the ideological hatred of Russia in this country. So, but during the wars when he changed. Well, actually, you said Paris, but he was also in Berlin. Right. So he saw the post-occupation, and he saw he had the whole problem with the treasury bills, the U.S. dollar, and the money that they had to print. There was a lot of stealing, and a lot of black market.
Right.
And he blamed the Russians for a lot of that. Now, that may or may not be true, but certainly a lot of American guys were also doing black market a lot. So there was a lot of corruption, but he saw it. But as the war ended and as the United States became more and more conscious of the Russian threat, so-called, we made NATO to resist this potential invasion of Europe, which made no sense because the Russians were exhausted, and financially and militarily. But anyway, so he joined the band because I guess that's one way to get ahead. He was on Wall Street, and pretty much everybody had to be, if not a Republican, everybody had to be a Cold Warrior. It was a mandate like we had to wear masks during COVID. It was, you have to feel this way. I remember many of his friends were liberal Jews from the 1930s, and he liked them very much, but he could no longer have that kind of relationship with them because they were out of style.
Well, you wrote he felt that he still had to feed the military-industrial state to
Well, that didn't
avoid...
come up until actually later. I mean, I never heard that expression until Eisenhower left office.
Right.
That was in 1964. 1960. When Eisenhower made that speech about, of course, Eisenhower had done more to build up the bomb than anybody, but yet he said at the very end, as if he had a guilt complex, he said, the most dangerous thing in American society, the most dangerous, he said, was the military-industrial nexus complex, I remember his exact words, that is going to infect all our state houses, the whole country. And it was coming faster than, he knew something was off, but he had contributed so much to it that you understand it's a strange speech, and you watch it many times, but I put it in my movie on Jack Kennedy. But it is a very significant statement because it is an old man who had been president for 2 terms telling us, warning us that there is something amiss in America, and it's very serious. And I think you've here at the Quincy Institute, you've certainly you felt the pulse, and that pulse has never ceased. And it's amazing to me how strong that complex has remained. It seems to be immune to any kind of logic or attack, and the power of money continues and continues. It's just impossible to break that lock. We can talk about ways to do it, but I'm sure you've thought about ways to do it.
Well, I'm hoping at the end that you're going to give us like the top 3 ways to solve it.
Yeah.
So if we drop it down a little bit, you also say about your father that civilian life could not match the intoxicating time of World War II.
Yeah.
Thinking back
my father
upon it,
instilled in me the fear of the Russians because when I was 10 years old, he's telling me, they're in our schools, they're in our state house, they're in our, they're all over the place. They're in journalism, which was a lot of nonsense. It was just people who were more liberal than he was. And it was a lot of fear, and of course that was added to by McCarthy and all that,
Right.
you know, the whole Red Scare. But the Red Scare had come out of the old Red Scare of 1919.
Right.
So it's a history in America that occurs repeatedly. I say that because in my lifetime now, the Russian thing never materialized. We spent a fortune on the Cold War. And as you know, Ronald Reagan, the arch foe of Soviet communism, ended up making a deal with Gorbachev.
Right.
So it shows you how history changes, because then we go for a period where it seems that we're out of that fear. It was a horrifying place to be.
So this is really interesting that this is how you're growing up, and then you're at Yale in 1964. You negotiate with the dean to take a year off to teach with a Catholic group in Vietnam. Did you think about ideology differently? Did you look at the Cold War differently, having gone to Vietnam?
No, I was a young, naive young man, and I went along with the flow. I wasn't a genius or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I used to have arguments with a schoolmate of mine who was pro-Castro. I would have vehement arguments with him.
Really?
It's very funny because he went the other way later,
and you went the other way.
No, I had to have my eyes awakened by experience. It's the
Yeah.
only way it could work.
Did you think about the Vietnamese in a certain way while you were there before you went as a soldier, or were you just kind of there?
No, I was there as a teacher originally, so I was teaching them.
Right.
And it was a very hectic job, very difficult, because I had huge classes and papers to correct. It was 2 semesters of hell, but I learned a lot about the society. And Layli Hayslip, who's here today.
Yeah. Layli, do you want to stand up and say, so we can recognize you? This is Layli Hayslip, who lived in Vietnam and wrote this phenomenal memoir, When Heaven and Earth Change Places, which Oliver then directed as a movie. And Layli is, if there's one thing you do tonight before you leave, please say hello to Layli. She's phenomenal.
She allowed, her book permitted me to do the 3rd installment of my Vietnam saga, which is about her and I can call it honestly, what the peasants were going through outside the cities. This was about the real people of Vietnam, the agricultural side that was pressured from both sides, the bombings from the Americans and the pressure from the VC, the Viet Cong, and the North Vietnamese. It was a horrible place to be in the middle of, and they suffered greatly, greatly. Estimates by Robert McNamara were as high as 3.5, 4 million Vietnamese were killed during that war.
Right.
That's a huge amount for a country smaller than Europe.
So you say after your experience teaching there, you volunteer for the draft in 1967, and you write, I was in a rush to get to the front lines before the war was over. Thinking back, what was the appeal? What were you hoping to achieve there?
Well, you have to be 18, 19 years old to remember that period in your life, you know, which is very hard when you're older. But it was complex. I couldn't deal with a lot of things. I was frustrated. I didn't know things. I didn't feel like my education was complete. I had been to Vietnam, but I still was confused about what was going on because I didn't understand all the politics. Of course, I was on my father's side because you always listen to your father if you're a good boy, which I tried to be. And the communists were bad. But then in that period, I went back because I didn't feel like I knew enough, that I wasn't complete. I didn't want to be a fraud, so I really insisted that I wrote that book, which came out in 1997, called Child's Night Dream, which is a pretty honest book about being 19 years old. It's a very interesting look at the world from a 19-year-old mentality, and you can understand why 19-year-olds go to war and why they're often the victim of war. Any of you who've had children who are confused at that age know what I'm talking about. It's a byproduct of a society which in many ways spiritually bereft.
It's interesting. So Oliver directs the second film in the trilogy Born on the 4th of July. It's written by, based on a book written by Ron Kovic, and Ron Kovic writes in Born on the 4th of July, like Mickey Mantle, John Wayne, and the Sands of Iwo Jima, they became my heroes, and you say he was a true believer. Did you also get a sense that military service would kind of help maybe even turn you into a man to kind of make that kind of jump?
We all did, but they still do that advertising. You know, become a man.
Be careful now. The Marine Corps recruiting depot commander is here, so I don't want to get him
I told
angry.
them, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go.
So seriously, this is how good the Marine Corps recruiting commander is, who's Brigadier General Rhines is here. He literally, as Oliver Stone was walking up onto the ship, was trying to recruit Oliver and said he was going to give him a waiver. So, so I want to stick on the. Okay.
I felt like I had to go to this war to understand it. I had to go back. I had already seen a bit of it from the fringes, but I went right into the heart of it. In 68,
Yeah.
September 67, I arrived. Tet Offensive falls on January 68, and it's a bloody year. A lot of people get killed. The whole thing turns when Johnson, in March of 68, backs out of the war. He says he's not going to run again.
Right.
We know it was over. If you were infantry, you knew it. Infantry, very smart. They may not be the most educated people, but they know what's going on, and they figured it out right away. Who's going to get killed for this? So it wasn't like it's pictured in the movies most of the time. But
I want to ask about that because I think this is really interesting. Looking back as a director on your younger self, did you see the gaps between kind of what was on the big screen? Were you kind of?
Oh yeah, we laughed at Green Berets. We laughed. It was shown in the outdoors actually in Daojiang. I saw it and it was hilarious. We were laughing our heads off because it didn't look like anything we saw in combat. And John, to be honest, was a little old and fat, but he was, what the hell, he was John Wayne. No, it turned sour. That whole thing was a different thing. And I didn't have the answers. I just came home and I was completely messed up, as many people were. But I made my way back gradually. Thank God my first wife was really helped me a lot. Educating myself helped me a lot. Went to NYU Film School, and made it gradually back. It took some time. It took some time. It's not like you're dramatic. It's just that you're confused.
Yeah.
And I had to learn more, and I learned over the next 10 years a lot about America, and I went to educate myself more. And when I met that professor you mentioned, Professor Kuznick, when I was in my 40s, late 40s, that's when I really studied history again.
Right.
Because he was a history professor for 30 years. So he led me in this study of American history, and that motivated me to do this untold history of the United States, of which 12 chapters, of which I really am proud, because it goes from 1898, when we first become interventionists in the Cuba, Philippines, in that 1898 to the McKinley era, and then all the way through Obama. It ends in 2013. But we tracked a pattern. We tracked a pattern of intervention, and it's an astounding story of repetition of the same problem.
Right.
And whatever they say, there is a repetition.
I wonder if it relates to something you said earlier, that this is confusing as a young kid, and you write in Chasing the Light that clearly it's a frightening experience, but it's also exciting, right? And do you kind of get a sense of or how do you explain that kind of?
At 19, you're not thinking about dying. You know, it's just something to be avoided.
Right.
So you see the guys that are dead, and it's shocking, yes, but are you really considering all the spiritual values of that death and what it means to his family, to the future generation? You're not really thinking about that.
Right.
You're thinking about Jesus Christ. I'm lucky. You know. That's true.
That's right.
And you're not thinking like that.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was I had a lot of sergeants who came out of World War II.
Right.
They were grizzled veterans, and most of them figured out ways to stay out of the field. They'd stay back, but they were all canny veterans, and they ran the PXs. You know, they make a lot of money, by the way. There was a lot of corruption going on, a lot of corruption. Lee can tell you they were selling out of the PX. They were selling everything they could. You know, and the Vietnamese were reselling them. So it was a money war. There was a lot of money. A lot of people made big money, especially the Vietnamese. They're very smart, very smart. What was I going to say?
We were talking about just this kind of weird place where it's both frightening and exciting. When our students read...
it's exciting to survive and exciting to kill them, and which happened, and to see them, to actually see them.
Yeah.
Because you never really saw them that much.
Our students read Karl Marlantis's What It's Like to Go to War, and Karl writes that combat is like crack cocaine of all the excitement highs with the crack cocaine costs.
Yeah, but Vietnam didn't have enough of that. Civil War was better. If you could go through that war, you could imagine. That was a really horrible, bloody. I think World War II was hard. Vietnam, in comparison, is a smaller war.
Yeah.
And my father used to make fun of it. He says it's a police action. Well, Dad, it was a police action maybe from your point of view, but not from where I was.
Yeah. So, what was your homecoming like? You write that, and this is really interesting, I think especially today, you write that you were terrified of the America you returned to. So what was your homecoming like?
Well, I was doing dope. I was an E4. I wasn't I didn't know officers. We never dealt with that level. My infantry unit was from the poorest parts of America, and they went back to poor jobs, or if at jobs at all. Most of them had hard fates. They died young from overwork or just got old because of the war. Some of them suicided. The blacks, many of them couldn't get jobs. And I went to Mississippi, I went to Tennessee, I saw them there. And I went to the inner city of Chicago. It was tough. So I talked for a class of people that was what platoon was about. And it wasn't about a lot of West Point people and a lot of the officers got on me, and I said, it's not about the officer class. I didn't even know who my officers were. We saw them at a distance, Right. But if you had any interaction with an officer, it was rare, because they wanted your butt in the field. And who was leading you in the field? Younger sergeants, the ones that were from my generation, but not the older sergeants, as I said, from Korea and World War II. They managed to stay out of that for the time, stay out of the field as much as possible.
So looking back, do you see similarities between your dad reintegrating back home after World War II and yours? No, really?
Yeah. My father married my mother in France. She picked her up on the street, actually. And not that you're thinking, but he really didn't know her, and he just liked her, and he went up to her on a bicycle, and he bumped into her, and
on purpose?
He looked great in his American uniform, 1944 or 5, Paris. Anyway, so he came back he was an older man. He went in his 30s, so he was from going back to Wall Street.
Yeah.
I was coming back, I was 20 years old, 21 years old. So what could I do, I had no job, I had no skills except digging a foxhole. And, it's not the same thing. Put it this way, you don't want to know all the story. It's in the book.
Okay.
I went to jail on a federal smuggling charge right away.
Here in San Diego, right?
Within 10 days. Yeah, here in San Diego. Yeah.
So we got in the car, and Oliver's like, San Diego will always have a special place in my heart.
No, San Diego was the cutting edge of the drug war. It wasn't announced as a drug war. Nixon was coming in. This was December '68. He was coming into office he would come into office only in March of '69.
Right.
But the drug war was very much evident. You saw it in the county. I don't know if it's still there. The county jailhouse or whatever they call it. I think 2,000 beds, but it was 5,000 people in there. They were all black and all Hispanic. I think I was one of the few white people. Yeah. And I got my eyes opened again. This was infantry, this was Vietnam.
Right.
This is the home,
Here
this is the war at home. Right. Believe me, none of these people had been to the Vietnam, very few of them.
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Because they hadn't had a dose of patriotism in them. They had been struggling their whole lives. So it was a very opening my eyes kind of wake up, which unsettled me for a long time.
Yeah. So how did going to NYU film school
gradually
open your eyes as well?
Well, gradually. No, I was gradually. I wasn't, hey, listen, I love movies. Oh, my mom took me all the time. My father liked good movies. So when you hear about this new thing called film school, and you can get a college degree from watching movies, you know, why not? Plus, I got the GI Bill,
Right,
which makes
right,
sense.
right.
So I went to NYU, and gradually developed my talent, and that took time. I liked to write, kept writing.
I was telling a bunch of folks that I was reading Chasing the Light, and I was 50 pages in, and I was like, oh my God, this is so well written. And I was like, duh, he's a screenwriter.
Oh, no, I wanted to be a writer originally,
yeah.
you know, and I thought I could be, but my fate was different.
Yeah. So if we can, let's talk a little bit about directing, specifically about war stories. Your fellow Vietnam veteran, Tim O'Brien, has written on the challenges of telling a true war story. What challenges did you face as a director for a film like Platoon in getting, as you say in your book, the real depiction of a nightmare war that you experienced?
You can't. It's not possible. I
Really?
really don't think so.
That's
It
interesting.
would be the most boring movie in the world because people
Yeah.
wouldn't understand the distances. You know, a war movie has to have some excitement. So ideally, you see the enemy, and you have to have that clash to make it work, to give it the juice. You got to personalize it. Now, that doesn't need to be so. I've seen other kind of war movies from Eastern Europe, very, very flat. And frankly, I don't think they would work so well with an American audience. America wants, we have television we grew up with, we're used to violence. We like that. We like it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a problem you're going to have to deal with the rest of your life, our life, the love of violence in this country, the love of action. So, no, you see,
Yeah.
when the enemy can kill you you can't even see them. They're out of range of your range.
Yeah, and I thought it was so fascinating. You say as a director, you have the power to decide who lives or die, and clearly war is so much more unpredictable than that. So there's this challenge of capturing the randomness of war in a sense, right?
But that's with actors, remember. I wouldn't want to play the God role.
Right, right.
I'm killing actors off, you know.
Right.
Just joking. You don't see the enemy much. When you do see him, it's suddenly the most surprising, weird thing. I mean, for example, one day, I didn't put this in the movie, but I swear I was, you know, they had those giant anthills in the
Right.
in the jungle in the 25th Infantry near Dao Chiang. We're in a firefight, and I'm behind the anthill, and I have an M79. Anybody who knows what an M79 is, it's a worthless gun. I mean, it's a shotgun-shaped thing, but you need to fire at least 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards to get any explosion. It won't go off. So I pop up over the head, and somehow there's a Vietnamese guy right looking at me right there across the anthill. I go down, he goes down. What the fuck did I just see? He was saying the same thing to himself. He was scared. So that's the kind of stupidity and weirdness that you run into.
Yeah.
Finally, when I got the courage, I didn't have a gun. I didn't have the courage to look around. He was gone. He'd split.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Has your definition of a real war story changed over time? Your worldview has clearly widened since you were a young 19-year-old in Vietnam.
What war film do you think, American war film, do you know that really works for you? Now,
Yeah, that's a great question.
I understand there's been some good war films. It's more about character,
Right.
because that's when you get to the actual war. You see too much killing, too easy,
Right.
too easy. The Marine pictures were great. Iwo Jima is great, but for example, Sergeant Ryan, I still cannot believe those American soldiers would go halfway across France to find a guy that they didn't have any knowledge or investment with. That is highly unlikely, and that was fictionalized to my. The D-Day invasion seemed very, very rough for that particular area, almost too rough. I mean, everyone gets killed, it seems, in that. The density of the fire is a little bit heavy, but that's the nature of a filmmaker. You want to make it better. You want to make it more dangerous, more violent. So it's not really as dramatic, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, is there a central argument for a film like Platoon? And if so, what is it?
Look, no film is going to change people if they don't want to be changed. Once a lot of people saw that movie and say, "I want to sign up." You know, a lot of them went to the Iraq War.
Same thing with Full Metal Jacket, right? Same thing with Full Metal Jacket, right? That it's
Yeah.
an anti-war film in a sense, but it's still
Yeah,
inspired.
you can't say that. You can just say, "Here it is."
Right.
Now, realize what you're getting into. Our country, it's a bigger issue, though. Why do we keep going back to? After the war in Vietnam, I thought maybe this is over. Maybe we're not going to be intervening in these countries anymore. Maybe. And certainly when Reagan makes a deal with Gorbachev, it seemed like, okay, the Cold War is off. Russia's back to where it should be. And unfortunately, too many people are invested in the war industries in this country. Too many. Too much money is at stake. We need an enemy. We need an enemy. We need it. If we don't have it, we feel it. It's the same argument in 45. My father was an economist. We need an enemy. Otherwise, we're going to have a massive depression again. They were scared about going back to the 30s. They hated Roosevelt at that point, too.
Right.
But everything turned, but they thought it was a full employment economy with a war. And as a result, that kind of set in, and it's been there. It's still in the neoconservative circles. It's Bible. It's a Bible.
Yeah.
They feel it. It's religious. It's more than reason.
Yeah.
It's an indoctrination of the soul.
Right. And part of it too, I wonder, is do you get a sense that we as Americans are uniquely susceptible to fear mongering?
No, I think the English help us a lot. I think the English are the most martial people I've ever seen.
Right.
They really have a science of it. But everyone in the world is,
Yeah.
to some degree, has that warrior in him. Everyone.
Right.
Not everyone, but you know what I'm saying. There's always an element in society. But society exists to civilize that, to curb it, to restrain it. But it seems that we're getting closer to it all the time. The advertisements on television are more realistic, more brutal, preparing for war. It seems to me that American people have accepted too readily the proposition that Russia is out to get us, and it hasn't ever been really debated. The people who debated on the representing the Russian point of view, many intellectuals, many academics, they don't get the time, they don't get the space. This was more and more evident during this Ukraine period. I was working with Stephen Cohn of NYU, who's one of the leading scholars of Russian history in America. He knows his stuff. He speaks Russian. He's been doing it for years, and he couldn't even get a booking. He had to go on the offbeat radio shows because he said the truth on CNN one time to somebody, and they no longer booked him. And we know that happened earlier too in the Iraq War, the first Iraq War. There was people like Donahue Bean. You couldn't say these things. So there seems to be some corporate control of television and the media that is pushing for war. It's a very subtle thing. It's not necessarily a conspiracy, but it is a drive towards profit.
So as someone in the business, do you feel that popular culture products like films also kind of promote this neoliberal interventionist foreign policy?
Like what products?
Films, as an example. So, I look at...
Sure. Yeah. I mean, after 2001, which, oh, God forbid, that was... and the whole world changed. The whole world changed because all of a sudden it became all right to adapt the war posture at all times. It became all right. We have the right to do anything now because they've done this to us.
Right.
Which was a very self-righteous point of view, represented by the guy I went to school with, who was a real moron, was George Bush. I mean, he was in my class. He got the C's. I left, so thank you.
He got the C's and you left.
Yeah. Well, he was entitled. He had a father. Anyway, I don't know why, but all of a sudden we decided that our enemies were everywhere, that there's no limit on this thing, and we talked about 60-some countries, and we went basically to war with the world, and it never changed. We never came back. We never.
About it.
And I, as much as I'd hoped for better things with Obama, it never happened. He just kept going with the same Patriot Act. Read the Patriot Act. It pisses me off. If you're a real patriot, it should piss you off. And now, and the censorship, all the censorship in the world that's going on, this is really sick. And as several candidates have pointed out, the free speech is our right. It's not a privilege. And you hear some of these people like Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton tell you that it's a privilege that we have to respect, a privilege to speak freely. No, it's not for you to give us the right to speak freely. We have the right. Fuck you. That's why I hate their presumption.
So I'd like to, as we get a little closer to the end, so we have some time for the audience, I'd like to speak briefly about legacies. What has been the most important legacy the Vietnam War has left for the United States, in your opinion? Yeah. What has been the most important legacy the Vietnam War has left?
Obviously nothing. Nobody paid attention, and we kept going back to war. It's a repeat, redux. Come on, we've made one mistake after the other in foreign affairs. We're not a very smart country in terms of diplomatically. If we'd had a little bit cooler, we could have gotten along with everybody in this world, everybody, maybe except for one or two exceptions. There's no reason why we can't be partners with Russia and with China. And we can have economic competition. We don't need a war.
Yes, thank you. Please. All right, so you brought this up earlier. I'm going to hold you to it now. How do we provoke Americans? How do we provoke Americans to think more critically about the use of military power overseas?
That's your job.
Oh wait, I'm gonna pass the buck to Laura. Laura, that's your job.
No, what you're going to do is you're going to take the risk takers are going to push it to the level. And neoconservatives are there in this administration as well as the last one. They're not going away. They're still around. Those people, and they're very dangerous because they think a certain way. They're really indoctrinated, but they will eventually push this thing to where put a couple of missiles into America, and we'll see if people can handle it. You know, that's the only way. We have to experience it with our own horror. You know, it won't be a 9/11. It'll be worse, I think.
All right. So one final question before I've got a surprise for you. We have a lot of students in the audience tonight. Fred Oliver's only guidance for the speaker series that he gave me a few years ago was that it be student-centric, and we've tried to have that as our guiding light, which is why every single table has got an SDSU student here with you.
San Diego State.
Yes. Yeah. Looking back on your career.
It's interesting. Yeah. San Diego State is doing this thing, not UC San Diego. That's...
So we actually have a couple of UC San Diego, so I apologize for the... That's right.
So the state universities are always better. They do better. They're more open. They're more liberal.
All right, so looking back on your career, we have all these students in the audience. What is the one key lesson you've learned about the relationship between war and American society that you want to share with them?
Let people talk. You should hear the other side before you go to war. And we always censor it. And the press is one of the worst. The media in this country, the mainstream media. Thank God for the internet. There are other people saying other things. We got to listen to them. You got to look for that stuff because you're not going to get it from the top 7 media companies. You're just not. They don't want to hear it. They don't want controversy. They just want to sell you stuff.
All right. Thank you. All right, before I turn it over to the audience, I've got a lightning round for you. Ready?
What's that?
I've got a lightning round. You ready?
You?
Lightning. Yeah. Best actor or actress you've ever worked with?
No way. No, I can't say that because, you know, I worked with a lot of talented people and I don't want to single anybody out.
I'm sure you're not going to say worst one then, right? All right, let me do this. All right, who's a really good one? All right, I won't do it. Favorite movie that's not your own?
Oh, come on. I love movies. You're talking several hundred movies, you know. Well, why do I go to one? I mean, you're
An
too
example
much,
of.
that's what movie critics do. You see, they always, oh yeah, here are the 10 best movies of the year. They bore me. They ruin movies for me. I like to discover. I like to see. There's so many good movies that are made that you never hear about.
All right, you got to give me one here. Best band to put in a movie soundtrack.
Best what?
Best band to put on a movie soundtrack.
Oh, it depends on the movie. Come on, you're asking me stupid movies. For a professor of history, you're really asking stupid questions.
My colleague Pierre Asson will agree with you on that one. All right, I think I'm going to turn it over to the audience now. All right, so we have two students in the back, Catherine and Thomas. Raise your hands. We've got about 10 minutes or so to take Q&A from the audience. So does anybody have a question they would like to ask Oliver? Please stand up so they can see you. And make sure the questions are better than mine that I just asked.
My name's Michael Lester. I am currently a student at San Diego State University, and I'm a film major as well. I'm a junior. My question to you is, when you were young, around my age, what was the biggest challenge to you in getting your voice heard and getting your voice out there?
Well, first of all, it was learning how to make a film, because whatever they say, I mean, they say you can learn it in a day. That's not quite true. You have to feel it. You have to feel your way. And you make smaller I started at NYU, so the natural route was short films. 1 minute, 2 minutes. We worked our way up to 3-4 minutes. And it's tricky, you know, because that was film. It was a different, it's not quite digital, which is a little bit more forgiving. But anyway, we learned lighting. We learned everything at NYU we could. And making short films was frustrating. I made 3. One was good. The other 2 didn't make it. They fell short, but they were certainly ambitious. And then after that becomes a search for a job. You have to get a job, and you have to go around, and you have to know people, and you have to basically, I went through it as a writer, and that was very hard because I had to write screenplays. I didn't want to have to beg. I wanted to prove. So I wrote 8 or 9, 10, 11 maybe, and always turned down. And I think some were not such a good screenplay, some were good. Platoon I wrote in '76. It was turned down for 10 years before it was made. 10 years. You know, I'm sick of rejection. And frankly, I'm sick of the business too, because the business went through all the worst impulses. You know, it's just the people who do the best, make the most money, are the most prostituted. They, generally speaking, they just see what they can make, and they know that's going to make money, and that's what they do it for. I've been passionately driven, and unfortunately, you pay a price for that. So. Probably right now, I don't know, probably I'm on a blacklist in Hollywood, I mean a gray list or whatever it is, because I did interviews with Putin. You know, they're so nuts in Hollywood. They're so virtuous. You have to express your virtue. You have to wear a ribbon that says how virtuous, how conscious you are of political correctness and all whatever you want to call it. So or you call it wokeness now. I can't stand all that stuff. That's why I went to Vietnam, to get away from that kind of thinking.
Thank you. Danny?
So be a rebel, and that's the best way to make films. You may not get there, but you'll feel good getting there. Or else you'll feel really bad, but look at what our country's becoming. Look at what it's becoming.
All right, I'm going to make a big mistake here and have a UCSD professor ask a question.
I'm super loud, so I probably don't need a mic.
Go ahead, because we're recording.
Okay. I just want to thank you, first of all, for coming. It's so fascinating to see you in person. And I want to thank you because you won't know this, but you gave me one of my first jobs. I worked on the Doors film. I guess you would have been in the service when Dr. King was killed. And I teach African American history, and I'm curious just to hear your thoughts about the changes you saw both in black servicemen and women, and also their relationships to white servicemen and women when you were in Vietnam and after, in fact.
Well, the killing of King was in April. That was a very big moment. Very big, because Johnson had just pulled out of the war in March. That was a giveaway. We, as I said earlier, we knew in our gut that we were not going to go for the victory here. This was going to be, it was over. I mean, it was going to be a stalemate or something. When he got killed, it got worse, because then the black soldiers, who were always very outspoken, you saw Platoon, that was the situation. They had their own worlds. They had their own music. They had their places to smoke dope in the infantry units. After that, it became, a lot of them, not all, became bitter. There was a bitterness toward the white people. I felt it. It was a very bad time. And then there was more, if you look at the figures, although there were more prison sentences, there was more insurrections, there were mutinies that started. I'm not going to go, fuck you, I'm not going to go out there. So it became a wilder place. And by 1969, they had the most, that's when I think the Defense Department, it was in 71, they put out that memo, famous memo, saying, look, what's happening in Vietnam this is the French mutinies of World War I. That's what they said. I think it was 71. You would know. But that, if you thought of the Kirk Douglas film, Paths of Glory, a beautiful film, that was about those French mutinies. They were slaughtering those troops. It was not like that in Vietnam, but still, people didn't want to die for that. Life was valuable.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what is the main reason this country hasn't actually won a war since World War II?
Why what?
Why the United States has not won a war since World War II.
Well, that's what the neoconservatives would answer. Well, we're going to win the next one, and that'll be World War III. Yeah, it's like the generals always say. Kennedy said it the best. He says, if they get their way, we'll never know who won. It's just there's no point in fighting. It's just so monstrous an idea now, and the generals still believe that they can win a limited nuclear war. That's doctrine. If you read the Pentagon stuff, it's amazing. They still believe it. Although the Russians now, thank God for the Russians, they have improved so much their nuclear that they're probably more dangerous than we are. So either way, we're losing. It's going to be, everybody loses. Our economy, which is the richest, second richest in the world, is going to be devastated from any limited war, even limited war. And who knows the dangers of nuclear winter? That one has never been factored in here.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Oliver Stone.
Thank you.
You can stay seated if you want. You want to just hang there for a second. So as a token of our appreciation, the two professors I had stand up in mine, we've gotten Oliver a gift of books. I don't know why they put Pierre Aslan's on top. That doesn't seem right. But on behalf of San Diego State University, thank you so much.
I like your thoughts.
Thank you. If you could all take your seat for a minute, I've got a couple closing comments. If you want to head back to your seat, you can. Sure. Just be careful. I want to take a few moments to share some closing comments, if I may. First, my sincere thanks to the Olivers for making this one of the very best speaker series in the nation. Thank you. Fred and Susan, it has been an honor working with you and your family to inform our community on issues that truly are vital to our nation's well-being. And those issues are tied inherently so to the mission of SDSU's Center for War and Society and that of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. I think as you heard tonight, war is a human phenomenon, and we can and we must do better at deciding when and why and how this nation of ours goes to war. And those decisions rely on our other theme for tonight, which is partnership. healthy democracies need smart policymakers and leaders and citizens, all to understand that the global interrelationships between war and societies in the modern era matter. We need to understand, as Oliver shared with us tonight, that bombing and killing on far-flung battlefields may solve short-term problems, but often hold long-term and frequently harmful consequences. So please, please, do not let this amazing conversation end here tonight on this ship. Partner with us to help build a more informed, a more wise, a more restrained United States foreign policy. The work we do here is important. Talk to any one of our SDSU students here tonight before you leave. They know better than just about anybody because they understand how knowledge of our history can help them and help us build a better future. So we invite you, both SDSU Center for War and Society and the Quincy Institute, to remain engaged. We invite you to become involved. We invite you to partner with us by investing in the promise of that better future. And we invite you to be part of a more peaceful and a more enlightened United States of America. Thank you for coming tonight, and please be safe returning home. Good night.